We are live. Hello, welcome all to the Shrike's Nest, a Shrike tabletop talk show. Maybe I should work on that name. It's a little, a little bit of a mouthful. But uh, ooh, it's fine. I'm R Val. It says I'm Robin Bell. That is my name. That is correct. I'm trying to go by R Val, R Val now, but that's fine. I'll fix that another time. Um, Today I am joined by Adrian Lumm. Is that Lumm?
Lum.
Lum? Sorry.
Lum. Just yep.
Yeah.
No,
Um,
no worries.
and yeah, how are you doing?
Not too bad today. It's Monday, but I'm
That's
working
fair.
through it.
Yeah, just by necessity of how the show is, it's on Monday, so I'm always getting people at the start of their week. Um, Hello and welcome all. Oh, hi Jewish Cthulhu. One of our chat regulars, also
Oh,
member of our Friday streams. Um, welcome. Okay. Um, yeah. So today we will be talking about your work, mostly in context of Magi. Correct. Recent release of yours came out
yes.
last month. Because we were gonna do this a little bit earlier, then there were some tech issues on my end, and then just rescheduling hell. Um, so yeah. In the briefest, what is your what's the elevator pitch for Magi?
Okay. So for Magi, the game is essentially set in a futuristic sci-fi setting that has supernatural elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
Players are magic users who are called Magi. It's an acronym. It's a scientific term. It stands for magically attuned genoatypical individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And this is essentially a society that is afraid of magic, afraid of the undead who frequently appear within the city. And the government has basically made magic illegal. So there's a whole thing where it's like a dystopian allegory for queerness kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
where the main characters are all magic users who are fighting against an oppressive government that wants to kill them.
Yeah, that's a great pitch. So it's important. I see the immediate and useful allegories for queerness in that. And you would describe this I've seen in your work as a crystal punk game.
Yeah, it's very like it has a lot of elements of cyberpunk in it. Namely, there's a lot of really high tech, like there's just a lot like hover cars, laser rifles, stuff like that. There's a lot of high tech stuff, but it's all powered by crystals.
Okay.
And the crystals are also what magi use to cast spells in a way
Mm-hmm.
that it's sort of just the act of using magic is sort of rebellious in nature because you're taking government property like these crystals that power all the world's technology and you're breaking it for your own uses.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really it's a fascinating tech pitch. The only other Crystal Punk game I know. Are you familiar at all with Megalos?
I've heard of that. I haven't had a chance to like sit down and read it, but I
Mm-hmm.
have heard of it, and I do think it's a pretty neat idea.
Yeah. Just both. I think both different interpretations of the word Crystal Punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just what comes to mind. So when did you start work on Magi?
Work on Magi. I kind of always had the idea in the back of my head as early as like I want to say I want to say it was October of last year was when I first got the idea for
Mm.
futuristic setting. Magi is an acronym for something that refers to magic users. I didn't know what at the time. And I think at the time I wanted to make it a Cortex Prime game, but then like I just got caught up in other projects. And then finally I just decided, I'd really rather just make this a Lumen game. And one thing led to another. I finally sat down and decided to make the dang thing, and then
Mm.
popped it into existence practically.
That's fair.
Not really, not really, but I think Magi was supposed to be the game that I would make um, before Apotheosis: The Dark Lord. But with everything that happened with the Dark Souls RPG, I just I just got consumed by rage and made that first, and then I made Magi. So
Yeah,
it took a while for that to come to fruition, but I finally got it off the ground.
yeah. So you mentioned the move from Cortex to Lumen. And I'm always curious when I see like because like systems are the bones of any game. How did the game and how did the setting change as you swapped from Cortex, which is a little bit more on like the more complex Fate side, to like a Lumen game, which never played one, but I'm fairly familiar with it. It's like the high combat, very action oriented kind of video gameish feel.
Yeah, at first I wanted Magi to be this sort of like not necessarily like an action game, but more like a sort of almost like a survival game, I guess is what I had pictured for it. Like I wanted there to be more elements of like sneaking around, about lying to people, about like, really either knowing when to conceal your identity and when to let it shine, that sort of thing. Um, and at first, I thought with the versatility of Cortex, I thought I could kind of work with that to make something that's a little more, I guess I want to say, well rounded in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like you're doing more social stuff and maybe a little combat on the side if you get in trouble. And then somewhere around there, I just kind of decided, you know what, it's Pride Month. I kind of just want to let's just be gay and do crimes.
Yeah.
And I just decided to switch to a more combat oriented experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good approach. And yeah, I think Lumen's a good system for that, especially like for the high powered kind of like chaotic experience. So yeah, what's one element of Magi that you feel like stands out and makes it like like a game that like people here listening should pick up? Obviously,
So
there might be
one
a few,
thing,
but
we're right. The one thing that I use to basically like sell the system to people who maybe are a little like who think the Lumen market is a little oversaturated. The one thing I point to for Magi is the fact that the classes are modular,
mm-hmm.
as in, when you make your class, you pick two out of six party roles.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be the physical fighter, you can be the magic blaster, you can be the healer, the tank, the buffer, the debuffer. You pick two of those six roles, and then you make your own class out of it, and then that gives you your spell list, and then you can actually take a third role and upgrade to that with your experience. It's very modular, and you're allowed to kind of pick the kind of character you want to be just from like mixing and matching between these six basic party roles.
Yeah, that kind of mix and match can really allow for a lot of freedom. What was one of the biggest challenges you ran into while working on Magi?
Definitely the spells, because I wanted there to be like a good selection of spells to do, and I wanted them all to be useful and powerful. But like, I also wanted to make them upgradable. Like, I wanted there to be like a tree system almost.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up settling on like each role has four different spells, and each spell has like three different upgrades that you can take two out of. But like, I think the challenge was certainly like giving people a reason to want to pick one role over another. Like a lot of games, you'll see like um, a lot of RPGs, a lot of video game RPGs too have this problem where you have things like buffs and debuffs, but very few games actually make it like a necessity to use them. I feel like a lot of them I feel like are optional or very situational, but I wanted to make a game where it said, okay, like we actually like we need somebody in this party who can buff people because we're gonna die otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. What like specifically like inspired the process of making Magi? Like what? It sounds like you thought a lot about the world, but like was there like a specific like piece of media or like, pieces of media that like influenced you?
Um, I'm gonna say Star Wars is definitely one. Not like I wouldn't say it was a direct inspiration, but just that idea that you're in a post light speed world, sort of like where
Mm-hmm.
there's just all this really great technology. Even if Star Wars is pretty retro in terms of like their interpretation of like what's advanced,
Mm-hmm.
because of course because it came out in like the 70s.
Yeah.
um, if there's one piece of media that I say like really influenced how I viewed the setting and the game, it would be Final Fantasy 13.
Mm-hmm.
That game has a very futuristic setting. Like a lot of the like literally the main characters are almost all of them are from this floating artificial moon that houses that's like a futuristic paradise for people, and they're like and people in that game are terrified of magic because like only people who are chosen by like these specific beings are able to use it, and it's usually for like a bad purpose. So like futuristic sci-fi with some fantasy elements and like this idea that magic is something to be afraid of when it really isn't, but it just has these negative connotations. I think that was really integral to like my decision to make an RPG that was sort of like that in a way.
Yeah. Um, and how would you how would you compare the process of designing Magi to like other games you've worked on? Is it like easier, harder? Do you? Yeah.
It was certainly easier. I've made two Lumen games in the past. This is
Mm.
my third Lumen game that I've designed, so I'm very familiar with the system and how it works, and I played several games using that system. So I feel like I had more of an understanding of its inner workings, so I could tweak that to fit my specific vision for what was going on. Um, so in a way, it was easier, but it was also a bit of a challenge, especially like getting it laid out and choosing what like I'm only just now starting like using graphic design. Like I've only really this year is my first year using like an actual publishing software make my to make my games. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it was challenging in some ways, but it was also like easier in a lot of ways. I have to say it was definitely a unique project to
Yeah.
make.
What's your publishing program?
I used Affinity Publisher.
Makes sense. Yeah. I've recently been
Yeah.
learning Affinity. I was trained on InDesign, and then my school subscription ran out, so that has.
I bought it when it was on sale like over a year and a half ago, but I never touched it. I was always scared to. I always just felt really intimidated by it, and then I just started messing with it, and I went, "Oh, this is actually like." I was like, "Oh, I literally took a Photoshop. Like I literally took Photoshop classes in high school. Like this isn't really that much different."
Mm-hmm.
like it's one of those things where it's a very intimidating first step, but once you start getting into the rhythm of it and start learning the tips and tricks, it actually gets really intuitive, I think.
Yeah, I find it fairly straightforward as a publisher like that goes. Um, so yeah, that's those are a few questions about Magi. We'll probably get back to it. Probably sprinkle in questions about it throughout. But whenever I have someone, I
Yeah,
like to kind of ask them about like a little bit of like where they're coming from in the game design world, because like a lot of people who are watching this might not be familiar with your work. So when did you get into either tabletop games or tabletop game design, whichever one you think is a more compelling story?
well, I mean, if we're being honest, I have been into tabletop games since I was about 15.
Mm-hmm.
I started with D&D 3.5 edition, and then I skipped over fourth for some reason. I guess everybody told me not to do it, so I
Mm-hmm.
just listened to them and went straight to fifth edition. I played that on and off for several years. Um, and then it wasn't until like 3 years ago, I want to say, when I first started like branching out into other games. And since then, I haven't really touched D&D all that much. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, I revisited fourth edition and I fell in love with it absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think like in terms of what I would sit down and play, I would probably play 13th Age. But like anyway, like
Mm-hmm.
um, so I've kind of been branching out into other RPGs for about 3 years now, and this is my second year designing them. I think I remember when I was younger, I want to say like 12, 2015, I always wanted to make my own games, but I didn't really have any idea of how. And
Yeah.
I think that was just, I think it wasn't until I was 25, a year and a half ago when I said, okay, I want to make that first step, and I'm gonna put something out there and see what see what I can come up with. And that's just kind of where I've been ever since.
Yeah. Um. That's. I mean, that's a really compelling. Like, you've been in it for a while. So what's what games? I guess like, what tabletop games would you consider like influences on how you think about your design?
If there's a lot actually. Um, let's see. If I had to name like just a couple off the top of my head, I would say that like Ryutama definitely introduced how I like that. That definitely that was a game changer in how I thought about how games function and what games are supposed to be like. Um, in addition to that, there's just it's so hard to pick one. I'm gonna actually look at my bookshelf and see if I have any like if anything comes to my mind.
That's totally fine.
Um,
All right.
Masks, a new generation. That was my first PBTA game, and by far, like after all this time, it's still my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just the idea of putting a game into a really tight theme and just doing every possible thing you can with that theme. Like I just love that game for so many reasons.
Yeah.
Um, Another one that really changed my view on how like tabletop games can be is like Desperation by Rafe Vector. Um,
Oh yeah.
what a wild ass game, but I freaking love it. And Wrath is an incredible designer.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I think actually we started having conversations on one of Raph's servers. I think the
Yeah,
Elden
yeah,
Ring one. Yeah.
yeah. The Elden Ring server. Yeah, we were all playing. We all they just gathered a bunch of people that they were friends with and said, "Hey, we're playing Elden Ring together," and that's kind of how we started talking.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been mutuals in the space for a while, but yeah, yeah, yeah. Finally, yeah. I think it helps to put me in context of a voice call. Anyway, uh, so yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are a couple really good influences. I'm familiar with both. So what's a game that's out, either yours or someone else's, that you think more people should know about but don't?
Oh Lord, everybody has such like great ideas. Lots of people have like great stuff going out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would feel kind of bad like starting out my my own work, but like definitely like if you haven't, I'm just gonna have to bring another project of Wraths out into the field. But like Bullet,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Wraths game Bullet, like Bullet with an X instead of a U, like just BXLLET. Fantastic like supernatural gunslinger game. Like there's this whole dynamic of you can use bullets to instantly just cause stuff to happen. You can kill people, you can get stuff to happen in the story, but you also kind of want to hold on to as many bullets as you can because you get a lot of weird, spooky powers depending on what class you're playing. The more bullets you hold,
Mm-hmm.
like I've played a game with them before, and like it's truly wild. Like it's a great experience. It's super fun.
Yeah, yeah. I was lucky to see the server for the jam for the second round of the jam. I have not designed in the bullet space because I've been buried in projects, but it's the very fascinating, like compelling approach to combat. In fact, in a conversation with them, they referred to it as the like kind of an anti-combat system.
Yeah, yeah, because like it's just you literally just spend a bullet and someone's dead. Like
Mm,
there's a system for rolling dice and stuff,
mm,
but like the fact that you can just immediately spend a resource just to end somebody's life is just it's just fantastic. It really causes that like anticlimactic, like unceremonious.
yeah.
People are just dying left and right.
Hmm,
Like if combat actually happens, yeah,
yeah.
it's a good way of putting it as an anti-combat system.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am lifting that from a conversation with Raph. So,
Yeah,
because I was trying to find common ground in our work, and
yeah.
um, so yeah, which is kind of where we're on this thread of like games we like and trends in tabletop gaming. What's like a trend in like design and like of course in like the indie space because like the indie and trad spaces are so different. What's a trend in the indie space you think is really positive, and what's one that you think is negative and hope it doesn't? So, like, I guess two questions. What's a trend you find positive, and what's a trend you find negative, and like would like to see less of?
Okay. A positive trend in the indie space. I definitely like. I'm definitely all for the like. I don't know how to put it, but like the policy of like this is a firm, hard thing that you can or cannot do in this game. Like
Mm-hmm.
I like games that are themed around certain ideas. Like um like there's just a lot of games out there, like especially by indie people who that explicitly say like, hey, you cannot play a cop in this game,
Mm.
or you cannot play a, or you cannot play like whatever side of the conflict this is because that's the bad side, and and if you're gonna try and do that, you're going against like what the game is about. So
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've integrated that into several of my games, especially because like by their very nature, they are about being different from
Mm-hmm.
people. And that's how it is with Magi. Like you are a magic user. You are a member of an oppressed class in this society. There is absolutely no getting around that. Like
For
I
sure.
like games that have I like that games that are about something. Like
Yeah.
not just presenting a setting, but like they're saying this game is about these kinds of stories. You're allowed, you can have your own stories or whatever, but like they're gonna be based on a simple unifying idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that trend, and I think it'll be really good to see that continue because that really contributes to a game's identity,
Yeah.
which I think is one of the very important factors of the game is what is it about, who is it for, and what kind of stories are you trying to tell with it.
For sure. And I think setting a hard limit on something, sometimes setting those limits can be as compelling as the things that are included in like setting negatives can be as compelling as setting positives in a setting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I think when done right, it's something that is absolutely a net positive.
Mm-hmm. Um, and yeah, yeah, yeah. That's So what's a what was your first indie RPG?
My first indie game, like the first game that wasn't by like a major publisher that I sat down and really digested and played,
Yeah,
that would have to be Ten Candles by Stephen Dewey.
I'm not sure I'm familiar. What's the short version?
um, so it is a horror RPG that uses 10 tea light candles as a clock,
Mm.
and every time a candle goes out, the scene changes. The setting gets more dangerous.
Ooh.
Dice rolls are less effective, and at the end of the story, everybody is guaranteed to die.
Oh, that's a nice. Like, do you know that going in as a player?
Yep, it tells you like, hey, this is a game about a lot of people spend. This is about how you spend your last moments in an apocalyptic scenario,
Oh, that's
and it
very
like
intense. Yeah.
yeah, it really takes this idea. It has a very unique mechanic of using candle. You're only supposed to play the game in candlelight,
Mm.
and the candles are a clock for the session. They tell you how long the session is going to be and how difficult things are going to get. But then also just the idea of like the way you generate characters using index cards and trading them around, and then having to use those traits when you make your characters. It's just a really cool concept,
Mm-hmm.
and just I don't know. It just that really influenced how I approach design, like making it about things other than just rolling dice and talking to people.
That's fair. Um, yeah, the inclusion of the hard time limit with a like an in-game element is interesting. Um, so I think going back to Magi, I just been thinking about like questions for Magi. What's your favorite class combination.
God, that is a hard one because like I tend to be more support oriented in RPG games that I play, like MMOs. I'm usually like a healer or a supporter, so like if I had to like put a hard like this is what I want to do, uh, if I made my own character in Magi, the first thing I would do, I would be a healer mixed with enhancer, just because I like healing, I like support, I like buffing, I like doing all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've seen it played with somebody. I played it once with somebody, and they did a fighter and enhancer. So their whole thing was, I'm doing physical DPS, but I'm also like throwing buffs on people too, and that was just pretty neat.
That's definitely a really fun build. Closest thing I would play. Yeah, and that's a you kind of touched on something that like I think about sometimes. Do you like to play in games you design, or do you prefer to like run them? I know people who kind of fall on both sides.
Um, I don't really have a strong. I like to run them, but I also like to play them. It's I've never actually been able to play in a game that I've made. I have run it. I've run them before several times, but actually being a player, that I haven't had to do that yet. But I think I would really like it. But I'm more of a let's see. I have been GMing games for a lot longer than I have been playing them,
Mm-hmm.
so it's hard to really say.
That's fair. I just by virtue of both designing and just kind of where I'm comfortable at the table, tend to be a forever GM. I like that role. I,
Yeah, I do
um,
too. I do too. I'm definitely a forever GM, and I enjoy the occasional break where I get to play characters, but I think for the most part, I'm pretty comfortable in the GM side of the table most of the time.
mm-hmm. um, oh, thanks for the heads up, chat. I had this stream mislabeled. I'll fix that right away. That won't be an issue for the VOD, but um,
All right.
oop, oop, just gonna fix that right now while we're talking. So while I'm fixing that, what's so I guess you were talking about your editions of D&D like that you've played. What drew you to fourth edition? You said you liked fourth edition a lot.
Um. So one thing people will know about me, like right off the bat, is I'm kind of a combat queen. Like
Mm-hmm.
I like playing RPGs where I get to hit stuff. Like
Yeah,
it's just uh, it's just the games I've grown up with, the RPGs I've played. Like I just enjoy that aspect of playing RPGs, and I don't think they're like. And I do have my reservations about how certain types of violence are implemented, sure, but like I think at the end of the day, when I'm playing an RPG, I want to kick somebody's ass.
yeah,
And one of the reasons I sort of fell out of fifth edition and started to look towards other RPGs, like just leaving D and D in general, is just, I was very dissatisfied with how the combat felt.
yeah, for
Like
sure.
it just didn't feel fun. It was long, boring, and I just personally did not enjoy it. But when I started to play other games and other combat systems, I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be quick, snappy, fun. And then somebody told me to look into fourth edition because that had the best combat in the entire collection of editions. And then I looked it over and I instantly fell in love with it. I was like, oh my god. Like I can see that there's some kinks in this. Like this is definitely like mid late 2000s game
Yeah.
design, but like
Mm-hmm.
nothing but good ideas. Like absolutely loved it.
Yeah. Fourth was my first edition. Both Dan, the other Shrike, and I, we both started with fourth. Um, we moved off of it, but you know, definitely for what it does, it is by far the one that like combat fans tend to be the most invested in. I seem to find that, or like one of the 3.5 or 3 point, yeah, Pathfinders, whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
I have yet to look over Pathfinder 2E, but like I keep telling myself I have to at some point because I've heard really good things about that game's combat as well.
mhm. Yeah, no, I've heard nothing but fantastic things. I've only played one, running a Rise of the Real Lords campaign. But yeah, no, it makes sense then why Magi ended up being, and that makes sense why you take into Lumen, which is like certainly a flavored combat system, but like still a notoriously like well made combat system. Um,
Absolutely, it is. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculously good for how simple it is, and I gotta give full props to Spencer Campbell for making such an incredible system.
mm-hmm. And you mentioned you made two other Lumen games in that space. What were those?
So my first one was Chosen Ones, which
Mm-hmm.
that was about um, living in an apocalyptic society and having like being chosen by this higher power to wield magic and go out and fight stuff for the greater good, whether that's exploring a ruined world, trying to find other traces of human civilization, things like that. And then my second Lumen game was Deathless,
Mm-hmm.
which that's mainly an action flick game. Like you're very specifically immortal action heroes. So there's just a lot of gunfighting and ass kicking and just a lot of fun stuff. It was I don't know if you've seen or heard the movie slash graphic novel The Old Guard. It took a lot of inspiration from that.
I think I've heard of it. I don't know if I would be able to like identify any like aspects of it, but I can
It,
picture what you're talking about.
yeah, like the general idea is that like these are people who are immortal. They've been alive for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and they're just kind of in the modern world, just being mercenaries and action movie stars because they just don't really have anything else to do with their lives. They just well, I'm here to fight, so
Yeah, for sure. That's and is there a way that like something like Magi has like reflects like your increased like familiarity with something like Lumen? Because like I'm sure over time like your familiarity with the system has grown. Like the ways you like design with it have grown.
yes, absolutely. Chosen Ones was a very quick like by the SR. I just followed the SRD and didn't really do anything else with it. Deathless, I took a very interesting take on that, like a death mechanic, in that like every time you die, you get back up, but there's like a chance that you won't. That there's a chance that you'll stay dead, and you're always rolling percent dice every time you die.
Mm-hmm.
But every human character, you, the enemies, everybody has set the same amount of hit points, which is five. So everybody has five hit points without exception, and
Mm-hmm.
you just go with that. But Magi specifically, I took a lot of inspiration and I wanted to make a variable system, and I wanted to make the resources more. I wanted to make the resources important. Like the thing about Lumen games is there's always a resource for
Mm-hmm.
characters to use. And I sort of like brushed it. I didn't really address it at Chosen Ones. I just said, this is your magic points. Deathless is just like, this is your stamina. Like, just like a general stamina to use your tools and weapons and but for Magi I said I want to make the resource
Mm-hmm.
integral to the story and the setting and the characters, and that takes the form of crystals, which you break them to cast spells. You have to destroy property to get more crystals, to scavenge crystals from other pieces of tech around the world. You have to break stuff to get them. But
Mm-hmm.
and the setting revolves around these crystals, so I wanted to make that an important part of the game's identity.
Yeah. When like what creative process in the writing like led you to like the crystals like a source of power?
Um, See, I'm not really sure. I had the idea that like this is a futuristic society. I've always had the idea of a game where there's like some kind of magical mineral or um, crystal or what have you, like some kind of substance that is sort of like just this applied phlebotonym of it does whatever people want it to do. And I finally came up with the idea to use crystals for that because then I was like, oh, well, a crystal, you can just like put that in your hand and throw it or crush it or do something with it. I was like, what if I actually made that like a spell casting thing to do? And then, oh, but what if I themed the entire setting around who is allowed to use crystals and for what purposes, and sort of just went from there.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's just the pathway that like we take in world building. That's I mean, like having like the core of like the magical mineral is like I can see like where that leads to like the crystal thing, and it works. It's certainly a very like compelling like both that it's the uh source of tech, but also the source of the power of the heroes.
Yeah,
In a way, if I'm understanding the setting correctly.
yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I kind of explained that in the text a little bit. How um, when the bad guys use laser rifles, those blaster bolts deal magic damage because the blasters are literally powered by the crystals. So of course they're magical in nature.
For sure.
They just don't they just don't call it that because it's their crystalline technology. They don't use it like it's magic.
And that kind of if you're going with the queer and like the oppression allegory, an oppressor using the tools that like using the same tools they're oppressing people over and like claiming it's different is like a very thematic thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like exactly. That was sort of my whole goal. I didn't mean to. I mean, I kind of wanted to make it for Pride Month, and that's I think that's what I think that's why I made the color scheme like aggressively pink.
Mm-hmm. It is a very
But
pink game if people check out the itch. But
yeah, it is very pink.
um,
But yeah, I just I wanted to tie it to the setting, and I wanted to tie it to the theme of the game, which is just you're here, you're queer, and you've had enough,
mm-hmm.
and you are not going to let these people continue to take what is yours and use it again, to oppress you.
For sure. All right. Well, that's about our halfway point. We're gonna take a quick break here, about 5 minutes. Come back. I'm gonna bring us down. And one second. And we are back. Hello, hello, hello. So we left off and we are coming back still talking about Magi. A I've been calling it a crystal punk action game, but if you had to give like a one word like bunch of descriptors to it, how would you
Uh,
describe it?
I usually just call it like futuristic fantasy. Like that's the tagline on the book, but it that applies too. Like it's kind of meant to be sort of ambiguous, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. Crystal Punk action definitely with the lumen and the emphasis on the technology of the setting. How much of the setting have you written? Like how expansive of a world is it for players to jump into?
Um, Basically whatever's in the text is all I've written about it.
Mm-hmm.
I designed it to be very flexible and to where you can kind of make your own sort of story out of it. Like the general idea is that it's the city state. This is pretty much where all of humanity is kept that you know of. There's like the dark lands that are outside, but I don't really define what those are or what those mean. It's just
Mm.
kind of I also like the government is very big. Like, so you can make it a totalitarian dictatorship. You can make it like you can make it like a corrupt republic or a senate or whatever. It's really up to you. I use very vague, generalized terms to refer to the powers that be and other aspects of it. Just because I like it. I like people making their own spin on it.
That's fair. When you run it, like, what does it tend to like look like? How does it manifest?
Um, so my vision, like I'm running a campaign right now, actually. The there's the prime minister, there is the Senate, and then there's the tribunal. Um, these are just these three entities that sort of function as like a three branch system of government. Um, not very much unlike the United States as it currently is right now. Um, but there's just a lot of focus on it's not super important. It's kind of one of those things where it's like the government is oppressive, and it's one of those things where it's like I don't really feel like it's important to define the inner workings of it unless you really want to get into that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just have like a simple three body style of government of just um, it's pseudo democratic. Like there's definitely elections, but I wouldn't say that they're particularly fair or just
For
or
sure.
that they allow magi to vote.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're both Americans. Yes, if that's too much doxing
Yes.
yourself. Okay, yeah. So I can see how, especially given the last 5 years. I was gonna say the last year, then I started counting backwards.
No, it's been a
Give,
little longer than 1 year.
given the given this given the increasing collapse of American democracy, um, I can see how that would be like an appealing default setting, especially for a game that is, in your own words, very much about queerness, even if it's like a subtextual.
Absolutely.
Um,
And I try not to put too much emphasis on like when it got this way or when it became harmful because like that's just uh, personally as somebody who is mostly white, it's just kind of not really my place to like say when something for sure became a bad place to live for certain people because that you ask anybody of any different of any different race or orientation or what have you, they'll give you a different answer. So
for sure.
it's I don't really like to put a strict time thing on when things happened. It's just sort of it's here. It's here now. This is what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, and for to an extent with a game where like in your own word, your game you prefer games that are about like specific things, like themes, then like really the only amount of world building you need are the ones is the world building that serves that theme.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot less. Yeah, it's more focused on I have this bad habit where I think of tabletop games in terms of movies, just because like that's like my other frame of like that's my other like favorite form of media. So,
Right, right,
like
and well, yeah, and I have a similar experience with video games. I've been playing video games a lot longer than I've been playing tabletop games. So yeah, I think of it as if this were a video game on the shelf, what would it be about? What kind of
Mm.
mechanics would it feature? Like why would somebody want to play this over something like Call of Duty or something?
Yeah, and like thinking about like the limits of storytelling within them. In Call of Duty, we don't learn a lot about like in their alt universe settings. We don't actually learn a lot about the way the government works because it's more
No,
about the
because it's not about that. It's not
yeah.
a like this isn't a point and click adventure game about the inner politics of the setting
Mm-hmm.
or how the world got this way. It's like there's absolutely room for that sort of storytelling if you wish to do it. It's just not something I actively really wanted to pay much attention to in terms of writing the rules.
For sure. What do you think players and GMs? I don't know what term you use for your game runner.
GM.
GM. What do you think players and GMs will like take to when developing the world so much? What do you hope they'll expand upon, like for themselves?
Um, the thing I want to help expand on is just I think I have a pretty solid framework for how this government, like what this government is afraid of, why this government is afraid of people who are different. Um, one thing I definitely encourage um, in the game's text as well as out of the game's text when I tell people like you have to realize that when it becomes known that you're a magi, your life changes, whether you in ways that you can't even imagine. So you have to think of it from that perspective. Like not you're different from how everybody else is in this world, not just from the fact that you can cast spells, but just being a magi in this society. It just fundamentally changes your life. And I think one thing I encourage people to explore about that kind of scenario is if you were suddenly like just suddenly realized you were a member of a privileged under of a I'm sorry, not a privileged underclass, a disenfranchised like non-privileged underclass, like how would that affect your daily life? Like how would that change how you see yourself, how you see other people?
Mm.
And I think really going into those dynamics is kind of what Magi is all about.
Yeah. Um. No, I certainly see. The apparent allegory for queerness is very clear, and like it makes sense. It was a Pride Month game. I don't think I made that connection when you first pitched being on the show about it. But
I don't think I
definitely
brought it up.
no.
I don't think I brought it up. So
Um,
no, that's definitely. But like just from my experience running this game, I've played this game with straight people and I've played this game with queer people, and every character backstory that has come out of this game is unmistakably queer.
mm,
Like like you have your like for instance, I'll just tell you about this one campaign I'm running right now.
absolutely.
We have a character who she found out that she was a magi, that she could cast spells, and she left home because she didn't want to put her family in danger. She just left a note and said, "All right, I'm out of here. Like I don't want you guys to get hurt, so I have to do this by myself." Then we had another character who has his parents were celebrities, so when he came out to his parents, they didn't mind personally, but they couldn't but the public was not allowed to know. Nobody in any of their social circles was allowed to know. For all intents and purposes, like his identity was their dirty little secret, and he just had enough of that and said, "I can't do this anymore," and left.
Hmm.
And like, and these are people who are they're just straight as they come, and like just this scenario that they've been presented with, they just come up with characters that they might not even make the connection at first, but like these are absolutely like unmistakably queer characters.
Yeah,
just using another name or a title.
yeah. And on that note, are you like how deep into like something like X-Men lore have you gotten? Which like depending on the decade is either a racial or queer allegory.
um, I'm gonna be dead honest. I don't actually know a whole lot about the X Men.
That's fair.
Like, I know the general. I know like the villain. The quote unquote villain is Magneto, and everything that he stands for is more or less correct. He just has
Mm.
disagreeable methods or what have you. But like I only have like a very surface level understanding of X-Men, but I do understand and recognize that it has very a lot of racial and a lot of queer elements that are
Yeah.
not even subtext, just text.
Yeah, a similar aspect of like person finding out they are like you said, like a person very suddenly finding out like they're a member of this like oppressed minority and class, and like what they do with that. I think yeah, we this is an X-Men that's another stream. But so what's uh sorry, I'm blanking on what I was going to ask. What is have you had people who like what are the backgrounds of play besides just like the orientation aspect? Like are the people who've like you've seen playing Magi or like some of them like newer to RPGs? Like what's how do people who are newer to RPGs and people who are more experienced with RPGs like kind of react differently to like the setting and the in the system? Yeah.
I feel like people who are more I feel like people who are more comfortable with like the concept of role playing are more able to like get into the headspace easier of a character that who even if they don't exactly know what they're going through, they have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way they interact with the system is like um, this is true for people who just get into Lumen in general. Like if you're brand new to RPGs, I think Lumen is very easy to get into. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just have to if you tell them, hey, this is a game where you're allowed to kick ass and just take names and do all this later. I feel like that's an easy concept to grasp, especially with like the simplicity of how the dice roll system works.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like more experienced people might have a little trouble getting into the simplicity of it all. Like just okay, you dealt damage, but like how did you actually do that? Like um you have to narrate to me what your character is actually physically doing and how they're doing it because that determines what stat you're using to roll with when you attack somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And like I feel like the more experienced people, like once they understand, they're like, oh, like I have to actually like physically describe how my character is nervously like just letting loose, like has never had a gun before in their life and is now just pouring bullets into a mech.
Mm-hmm.
Like then they're like, oh, he's nervous. He is just very like not even aiming, just shooting, like blindly hoping he hits something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, and then all right, so that means you use the stat.
That's fair. You mentioned a mech. So what possible enemies might a party in Magi come across and face?
The most common and like the most common one is going to be the CP troops, which are they're basically RoboCops. They're
Mm-hmm.
just they're just these humanoid machines that resemble cops, and they have arm cannons that shoot lasers, and they just arrest people and tell them halt. you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they're typically easy to take out. They might encounter mechs, like mechs of various sizes that are piloted by officers. Um, there is a branch of the government called the Department of Magical Phenomena, or the DMP. You'll fight agents who work for that organization. And then you'll also fight traditional fantasy monsters like
Mm-hmm.
um, like goblins. Yeah, like stuff like goblins, chimera,
Mm-hmm.
manticores, things like that. Except they're kind of reflavored not as like animals. But they're not typical wildlife. They're actually like biological weapons made by the government, like engineered to hunt magi, basically, that they let loose.
Interesting. So it's a bit more of a mundane setting, mostly. I'm presuming humans, at like
Yeah,
the core, but then like monsters, the monsters that we would know and be familiar with, like come out of like like you said, like genetic augmentation. Or
yeah, it's like genetic augmentation, like creating creatures from scratch. And then there's also an element of undead,
mm-hmm.
which are in this setting, they're more like manifestations of despair and chaos that can often come from people who are just in these miserable situations.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, like there's vampires, which they aren't humans who have become vampires or anything like that. They are shadow creatures that like take the form of beautiful humanoids. and sort of entice you, and they take your blood and all, and they do vampire stuff, of course. But then there's like you have ghosts that just haunt the city streets and other things like that. And those are admittedly they're very secondary. Like they're one of the three enemy types, but in terms of like setting, they're only mentioned like in a couple pages or so.
Mm,
But the long and short of it is like they're just a supernatural element to the setting that is basically up to you how much you want to include or not include.
for sure. Yeah, because I could see that reflavoring the game based on how much you want to get into that, with the other two being fairly explainable within the universe's form of science. Um, yes. So we've got 15 minutes left here. I think we'll close off at 8:45. What's so we talked about Magi, which is your project. It's out now on itch and any other platforms.
No, I tried drive through, but I haven't really been able to set up anything there. But yeah, it's on itch.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Um, and it's are you planning any content expansions for it in the near future or?
I do plan on providing a rule supplement that kind of gives more detail on how to do non-combat related magic because that's just something that some people have asked me about. And I've always house ruled it as well. You can just break a crystal and do any kind of random magical effect that you want. But then I realized it doesn't really say that in the rules. It's like, oh, I should probably update that or do give some kind of like a not necessarily a patch, but like more like a small little supplement that just provides optional rules and things you can do in the game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
uh, I think, yeah, I definitely think there is a supplement on the way. Just it's probably going to be like if not free for people who already own it, like definitely like at a smaller price.
For sure, as all supplements are. Uh, what's going beyond Magi for a second? What's your do you have other projects in the works? Like what's next on Adrian Lumm's radar?
Actually, I do have something coming out. Not I wouldn't say this month. I would say possibly closer to next month, depending on when I can sit down and make it. Um, I am working on a game that has a working title currently that I'm not going to reveal.
That's fair.
But imagine being scoundrels in a Renaissance style fantasy city or setting, of some kind. And you have there are four classes to choose from, and each class not only has its own mechanic, but also its own method of conflict resolution. So a merchant, for example, their whole thing is earning and spending coins, but in order to resolve conflict, you have to bet and wager coins and then flip those coins. And then your heads and your tails, that
Mm-hmm.
determines stress suffered, how many successes you gain, what have you. But then in the same vein, you'll have a gambler who their whole shtick is playing cards, and they have to draw hands of cards. They draw cards whenever they do something in the fiction. They have to play poker hands to get successes, and they can take stress to reshuffle. And then another class which uses multicolored tokens and has to make combinations of those tokens to make certain effects happen. Things like that. Like I'm working on a game right now where each class has a different set of tools that they use to actually play the game.
Yeah, yeah. How's that would have I mean, perhaps we'll have you back on when you're when you have more to talk about with that. But I guess I have some questions about it right now. What's how does that affect the probability space of the players in like uh what have you found like that affects like the randomness and the different chances players have to succeed?
I think it's more to do. I've got the probability more or less in an area where it's more or less equal. Like there's going to be some variation, obviously, because you're
Mm,
using dice for one character, cards for another. Um, but I think it's more. I'm trying to theme the game more around the classes themselves. Like the gambler is the gambler. You're going to want to role play a certain way in order to be able to draw more cards. And I think tying that resource system to your character behaving a certain way, doing certain things, it's supposed to be more of a motivator to do things in role play. I'm taking a huge step away from like a combat centric game, and I'm doing something purely for the character acting of it, I suppose.
For sure, it definitely sounds like it'd be very compelling to like very. It would certainly evoke a very specific feel if I was playing using something different than another player with a different class. So yes. Uh,
Right. Like the idea behind it is that when you pick your class, whether it's merchant or gambler or witch or pirates, those are the four classes that I have
mm,
planned for this game so far, is that you not only like get that character sheet with like those rules and everything, but you have that persona to embody that almost like a stereotype to fulfill, but more like that. It's like a general idea of what a person is that you're going to inhabit and have to and embody and play around with to your desire, to your heart's desire.
yeah. And you said that might be this month, but that might be next month or later.
Definitely not this month. It's probably going to be next month or maybe even early September, but we'll have to see. I have a good skeleton written out so far, but I have to actually start putting it together and like it's still in the early design stages, so probably not this month.
Yeah. So with I guess as we wrap up here, what is a game that's coming out soon that isn't one of yours that you are excited about? Like what's a release you're excited about?
Um, See, I have a lot of games that I have been looking forward to have already sort of come out. I haven't really been in the know that much with what's coming out soon. Um, to really be able to say.
You're fine.
Um, yeah, I'd have to like look around and see what's actually coming out before I can start like getting hyped for something. But yeah, right now I feel like I don't really feel like there's a lull in stuff coming out here lately because I know there is stuff out there.
I hope not.
Yeah, I just haven't had a chance to. I just haven't had a chance to really like take a look and get a feel for what's coming yet. So I have to get back with you on that.
That's fine. That's fine. Do you have any other thoughts either about like do you have any other thoughts about Magi? Any recommendations you'd have for people who are picking it up after listening to this interview? Or
um, yeah. If I had a recommendation or like a thought, I guess I don't know. Like everything's kind of. Oh, make sure you download the play guide because that has a bit more clarification on some stuff that you might not really get from the text. Like it tells you what to do if your stat is at zero.
mhm.
It tells you how to scavenge for crystals. So like definitely like the play guide, it's down there with the character sheets. Like do like absolutely make sure you pick that up because even if you don't think you'll need it, it'll help to have a reference there, and it gives you an idea of some other things you can do that
Mhm.
might not have been as spelled out as well as the book. So yeah, absolutely. Make sure you grab that before you start playing.
Yeah. And Magi is available now on your itch. What was the price you set for it again?
Um, it is $14, but there are plenty of community copies available.
Oh,
And if there aren't, feel free to contact me at Arnivol on Twitter or even leave a comment on the game itself, and I will refresh them. I basically never run out of community copies. I never let them run out.
absolutely. But if the folks at home do have money, it's absolutely worth a buy. Do you have any closing thoughts for the audience before we call it in our last 5 minutes here?
Um, no, not really. I think I've said pretty much everything I think I could. But absolutely, like, thank you for having me here and
Abs-
everything like that. It's always fun to talk about my work and just things that I've won. I even wore my hot pink shirt for the special event.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back when your other project looks like it's coming out. Because we do this every Monday. We're always looking for someone to put on the slot. If not, it ends up being Lilith Lilac and me talking about Thorn system. So uh, that's kind of our safety fault. So
All right, so you're putting me to work, is what you're saying.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, with that, I actually you go ahead and introduce yourself. Give a sign off where people can find you, anything else you think is important for people to know.
Oh, sure. Okay. So, I'm Adrian Lumm. I use he/they pronouns. You can find me at Twitter at Arnivold, Arnivold. It's a nonsense word I made up and it's mine. And then arnivold.itch.io for my Twitch, for not my Twitch. Wow, I don't have a Twitch. For my itch store where you can find all of my games. Um, I'm a very active creator. I'm always looking for new games to make and games to play with people. But yeah, absolutely feel free to check me out on those platforms.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for making it. This was glad we got this rescheduled. My connection says that we've lost 50% of the stream, but my friend who's in chat says that's not true. So, OBS has weird ghosts in it sometimes, and there will be a VOD available on YouTube. In fact, I've been Val, otherwise known as Robin Bell. I am one of the people on Shrike Tabletop. We're releasing Blood Neon this July. It's hyper-violent vaporwave fantasy and a tactical combat chemipunk game, Arrow Silence, in September now, as of a slight change in schedule. And you can find us at Shrike Tabletop, and you can find me at Citrine Songbird. And we're back every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday with either a talk show, video game, or some sort of tabletop RPG on Fridays. So, with that, thank you all so much, and we will go to Bumper.